Donovan Hale had never once in his life said please. Not when he was 9 years old, and his father held a knife to his throat to teach him what real fear tasted like. Not when he was 23 and clawed his way up from the gutters of South Chicago, with nothing but a name people were starting to whisper. And certainly not now, at 41, when that whisper had grown into something that made grown men lose control of their bladders before he'd even opened his mouth. He didn't ask. He took. He decided. He ended things. That was the natural order of the world, as far as Donovan Hale was concerned, and the world had never once argued back. Until a Tuesday in March, in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, when a woman in a wrinkled cardigan told him he was wrong. Petra Wynne had learned, early and painfully, that the best way to survive a room was to disappear inside it. She was good at it. Genuinely, almost artistically good. She knew how to angle her body so she took up less visual space. She knew which chairs faced the wall and which corners had the least foot traffic. She knew how to keep her voice just below the register that made people turn their heads. At 31, she had spent the better part of a decade perfecting the quiet, careful art of being overlooked. It was a survival strategy, not a comfortable one, but a functional one. She was the senior financial analyst for Mercy Cross Medical Center, a private hospital on the north edge of Chicago that served, in addition to its legitimate patient population, a very particular and very private clientele. The kind of clientele who paid in cash, asked no questions, and expected the same in return. Petra had inherited this arrangement from her predecessor, a nervous man named Gerald, who had retired abruptly and relocated to somewhere without an extradition treaty. She had not asked for the arrangement, but she was good with numbers, better with secrets, and smart enough to understand that some doors, once opened, did not close from the inside. So she kept the books, she kept her head down, and she kept, above all else, the absolute ironclad rule she had set for herself on her first day in this role. Do not be memorable, do not be interesting, do not, under any circumstances, be seen. She had kept that rule for 4 years without a single violation. And then Donovan Hale walked into her office at 7:45 on a Tuesday morning, dropped a folder on her desk without knocking, and looked at her like she was a smudge on an otherwise clean window. "You're the accountant," he said. It wasn't a question. Petra looked up from her monitor. She registered, in the span of about 2 seconds, the following things. The quality of his coat, which was the kind of wool that cost more than her monthly rent. The 2 men positioned outside her door, which she could see through the narrow window beside it. The way he stood, not like a man who was waiting, but like a man who had already decided the outcome of a conversation that hadn't started yet. She registered all of this, and then she said very calmly, "I'm the senior financial analyst. Yes." Something moved across his face. Not irritation, exactly. More like the faint surprise of a man who had expected an echo and gotten a voice instead. "I need the Remington account reconciled by noon," he said. Petra glanced at her screen, then back at him. "The Remington file hasn't been flagged for review. I'd need a signed authorization from administration before I can. I own administration. Then it should be very easy for you to get a signature." The silence that followed had a texture to it, dense and pressurized like the air before a storm. Petra felt it on her skin, that particular quality of stillness that descended on rooms when Donovan Hale stopped speaking. She'd heard about it from the nurses. She'd observed it, at a careful distance, the 2 times she'd seen him in the building before today. She had not expected to feel it aimed directly at her. His eyes moved over her in a way that wasn't cruel, exactly, but wasn't kind either. It was the gaze of a man who catalogued things, who sorted, assessed, and filed. She was aware, acutely and uncomfortably, of the cardigan she'd grabbed off the back of her chair this morning because the hospital ran cold, of the reading glasses she hadn't taken off, of the 3 empty coffee cups lined up on the edge of her desk like a sad little monument to a very long Monday. "You're not afraid of me," he said. His tone suggested this was less an observation than a diagnostic finding. "I don't have enough information to be afraid of you," she said. "I have a name and a coat. That's not a threat assessment." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he picked up his folder and left. Petra sat very still for approximately 30 seconds after the door closed. Then she put her face in her hands and breathed. The authorization came through at 8:15. Signed, time-stamped. Filed correctly through every proper channel, as if someone had made a point of it. Petra stared at it for a while. Then she opened the Remington file and got to work. She found the discrepancy at 9:40. It wasn't large, not by the standards of the accounts she managed. A routing inconsistency buried 3 layers deep in a series of shell transfers, the kind of thing that would have looked like a rounding error to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it, and like nothing at all to anyone who didn't understand how the underlying structures were supposed to connect. But Petra understood them. She'd built half of them herself, cleaning up Gerald's anxious, sloppy work in her first year. She knew what she was looking at. Someone had been skimming, carefully, patiently, over the course of about 8 months, small enough amounts to avoid triggering any automated flags, large enough in aggregate to constitute a number that would make a certain kind of man very, very angry. She sat with this information for a while. The smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that a woman who had spent 4 years perfecting the art of invisibility would do, was to note the discrepancy, document it cleanly, and present it without editorializing to whoever had authorized the review. She prepared her report. It was precise. It was thorough. It was exactly what had been asked of her. And then she added, at the bottom, in clear and unambiguous language, the name of the person responsible. Because Petra Wynne was good at many things, but being dishonest was not one of them. And because, when she had been 9 years old, a woman named Mrs. Kavanagh had told her that being afraid was not the same as being wrong, and that doing the right thing was not the same as being stupid, and those 2 pieces of advice had lodged somewhere behind her sternum and never quite come loose. She emailed the report at 11:58. At 12:03, her office door opened again. Donovan Hale read standing up. He always did. He found that sitting gave people the impression that there was time for things to go differently than they were going to go. He preferred to be on his feet, preferred the clarity of it. He read the report once. Then he read the name at the bottom. He was quiet for a long time. "You're sure?" he said finally. "The documentation is in the appendix," Petra said. She had her hands folded on her desk and her voice was even and her heart was doing something alarming against her ribs, but her face, she was fairly certain, was composed. Pages 7 through 11. "I've cross-referenced 3 separate. I read it," he said. Another silence. He set the report down on her desk with the controlled deliberateness of a man who was being very careful with his hands. "This person," he said, "has worked for me for 6 years, I know. He has been trusted with." He stopped. His jaw moved. "Do you understand what you've put in writing here?" "Yes," Petra said. "I also understand that you asked me to reconcile the account." "I reconciled the account. What you asked for and what I found aren't separate items." He looked at her again with that cataloguing gaze. This time it felt different, less like assessment and more like something he hadn't named yet. "Why didn't you bury it?" he asked. "People in your position bury things." It was, she thought, the most honest question he'd asked. Maybe the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in a long time. The words had a different quality than the rest of his speech, less polished, more direct. Petra considered her answer. "Because it was wrong," she said. "And because you would have found it eventually, and then you would have had questions about why I didn't." Something changed in his expression. It was small, a fractional shift around the eyes, a slight easing of the particular tension that seemed to live permanently in the muscles of his face. She almost missed it. "That's a very practical answer," he said. "I'm a very practical person." He was quiet again. He picked up the report. He looked at the last page once more, at the name she had written in plain, clean font, at the bottom of her careful, thorough, professionally devastating document. "I'll need you to testify to this," he said. "Internally, to my people." Petra felt something cold move through her. This was the moment she understood, where the conversation stopped being about accounting. "That's a significant ask," she said carefully. "Yes, people who testify to things in your world are protected," he said. "Flat, immediate, or they're not, depending on whose side they're on." He looked at her directly. "You'd be on my side." "I don't have a side," she said. "I have a job." "That," Donovan Hale said quietly, "is about to change." He came back the next morning, and the morning after that, not always with questions about the accounts, though there were always questions about the accounts, because the person she had named had, it turned out, been considerably more creative than even her report had suggested. And the unraveling was slow and complex and required. More than once, Petra, sitting across from Donovan Hale in her small office, while he listened to her explain financial architecture, with the focused, unnerving attention of a man who was accustomed to understanding power structures and had simply never applied that skill to balance sheets before. He was, she realized with some discomfort, quick, genuinely quick. He asked exactly the right questions. He retained everything she told him. He had the kind of mind that found patterns the way other people found light switches, naturally without having to look. She tried very hard not to find this interesting. On the fourth morning he brought coffee. 2 cups set on her desk without comment. She looked at them for a moment, then looked at him. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "I know," he said. "You take it black." She did. She hadn't told him that. She picked up the cup and didn't say anything else about it. It was the 3rd day after that when she heard what had happened to the man whose name she had put at the bottom of her report. She heard it the way she heard most things in this building, sideways, in fragments, through the particular frequency of frightened people trying to sound like they weren't. What she pieced together was enough. She was sitting very still at her desk when Donovan came in that afternoon. He looked at her face and stopped just inside the door. "You heard," he said. "Yes." He moved to the chair across from her desk, the one he'd taken to using, which she had stopped pretending to be surprised by, and sat down. Which was unusual. He almost never sat. "Say what you want to say," he said. Petra looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Mrs. Kavanagh. She thought about the 3 empty coffee cups on her desk. She thought about the 4 years she'd spent making herself small enough to be invisible. And the 8 months someone had spent stealing from a man who apparently noticed everything. And the particular loneliness of being the only person in a room willing to say a true thing out loud. "I didn't put his name on that report so that you could." She stopped, started again. "I told you what I found because it was the honest thing to do. Because the numbers were true, and I don't lie about numbers. I need you to understand that's the only reason. I'm not a weapon. I'm not a tool. I'm a person who is very good at her job. And I did my job. And what you chose to do with my work is yours to carry, not mine." The silence stretched out long enough that she could hear the ventilation system cycling on. "You're telling me," Donovan said slowly, "that you have a line. Everyone has a line." "In my experience," he said, "the lines move when I'm involved. Mine doesn't." He looked at her, and this time the look was different from every other one he'd given her. Not cataloging, not assessing, not the cold efficiency of a man processing information. It was something rawer than that. Something that looked in the specific strange light of her small office, almost like hunger, not the kind that frightened her. Something else, something that, if she were being honest, and she was always being honest, frightened her in an entirely different way. "Everyone is afraid of me," he said. It wasn't a boast, it was quieter than that, almost like a confession. "I know," Petra said. "You're not." She thought about that. She thought about the way her heart had hammered for 30 seconds after he left on the first morning. She thought about the careful, controlled quality of her breathing every time his footsteps came down the hall. "I didn't say that," she said. Something moved through his expression, quick, complex, gone before she could read it fully. "Then why don't you show it?" he asked. "Because," Petra said, "being afraid is not the same as being wrong. And I've never once been wrong about a number." 3 weeks later, she testified. She sat in a room with 7 men she did not know, and 1 man she was beginning to. And she walked them through the documentation with the same clear, unhurried precision she brought to everything. She answered questions without hedging. She corrected 2 mischaracterizations without apology. She explained, once, in terms that required no financial background to understand, exactly what had been stolen and exactly how she had found it. When it was over, one of the 7 men, older, heavy-set, with the watchful eyes of someone who had survived many rooms, looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I rarely am," Petra said. She felt Donovan's eyes on her from across the table. She didn't look at him. She gathered her documents, thanked the room with the measured courtesy of a woman who had been raised to be polite even in difficult circumstances, and walked out. She made it to the elevator before her legs decided they were done pretending to be steady. She put one hand on the wall and breathed. The elevator doors opened, then closed, then opened again. Donovan was standing in the hall. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm aware," she said. "It's a physiological response. It'll pass." He looked at her hand against the wall. Then he did something she did not expect. He reached out very slowly and covered her hand with his. His hand was warm, large. She was aware of this in a way that was difficult to categorize under anything practical. "You did well," he said. Petra looked at their hands for a moment. Then she looked up at him. This close, she could see things she hadn't been able to from across a desk. A faint scar along his jaw, the precise way exhaustion lived around his eyes. The fact that he was watching her with an expression she had no professional framework for whatsoever. "You came to find me," she said. "Yes, why?" He was quiet for a moment. The elevator opened and closed again behind them, unattended. "Because you're the only person in that room who said a true thing," he said, "and I don't know what to do with that." Petra looked at him for a long time. "You could start," she said, "by letting me buy my own coffee tomorrow." He blinked. It was, she thought, possibly the first unguarded expression she had ever seen on his face. Pure, unprocessed surprise. The look of a man whose world had just rearranged itself without asking permission. Then, slowly, something that was not quite a smile and not a smile moved across his features. "I don't take orders," he said. "I know," Petra said. "I'm not giving you one. I'm telling you what I want. Those are different things, and I think you know that." The non-smile deepened. "You're going to be trouble," Donovan Hales said quietly. "Probably," Petra agreed, "but I'll be very accurate trouble, and I think at this point, you've established that accurate is what you need." He looked at her for one more long moment. Outside the hospital windows, the city moved on, indifferent, grinding, full of the particular noise of a world that did not concern itself with small hallways and large realizations. Then Donovan Hale, who had never once in his life said please, who had built his empire on the certainty that the world bent toward him and not the other way around, who had walked into a small office 3 weeks ago expecting an echo, reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a card, and held it out to her. It had a single phone number on it. Nothing else. "Tomorrow," he said, "you can tell me what else you want." Petra looked at the card. She thought about the line she had drawn and the line she had held, and the particular, terrifying feeling of being seen by someone who never missed anything. She took the card. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some things she had learned did not need to be said out loud to be completely and absolutely true.